When Elvis stepped onto the stage, he saw him and froze. The 9-year-old boy sitting in the third row looked like young Elvis had traveled through time. The same curly hair, the same smile, the same facial features, even sitting the same way. Elvis was so shocked he forgot the lyrics and just stared at the child, while 15,000 people tried to understand what was happening. Elvis slowly approached the microphone and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I think I'm looking at the future Elvis right there. What happened that night changed not only that child's life, but Elvis's life forever. This is the story of the most incredible physical resemblance in music history, and how meeting his own doppelganger reminded the king of rock and roll who he used to be and who he could still become." Michael Thompson was born on January 8, 1966, in Tupelo, Mississippi, the exact same town and the exact same date as Elvis Presley, but 31 years later. The coincidence was remarkable enough, but what happened as Michael grew older was nothing short of extraordinary. By the time he was 5 years old, people in Tupelo were stopping his parents on the street to comment on how much their son looked like the famous Elvis Presley had looked as a child. Michael's parents, Robert and Linda Thompson, were hard-working people who owned a small grocery store in Tupelo. They weren't particularly wealthy, but they provided a comfortable life for Michael and his younger sister, Amy. Robert worked long hours at the store while Linda managed the books and took care of the children. They were Elvis fans, like most people in Tupelo, but they weren't obsessed with the king or his legacy. They were just regular folks trying to raise their family in the town that had also produced the world's most famous entertainer. The resemblance between Michael and young Elvis became more pronounced as Michael grew older. By age 7, the similarity was so striking that people would often do double takes when they saw him. Michael had the same dark, naturally curly hair that Elvis had worn as a child, the same deep brown eyes, the same facial structure, and even the same shy smile that would occasionally break into that famous crooked grin that had made Elvis so charming. But it wasn't just physical features. Michael seemed to have inherited some of Elvis's natural charisma and stage presence, even though he had no formal training or encouragement in that direction. When Michael walked into a room, people noticed him. He had a confidence and charm that was unusual for a child his age, and he could light up a room with his smile just like Elvis had been able to do. Michael's parents tried to downplay the resemblance, not wanting their son to become fixated on looking like a famous person or to develop an inflated ego because of his appearance. They encouraged Michael to pursue his own interests and develop his own identity, separate from any connection to Elvis Presley. Michael was a good student, loved playing baseball, and was interested in science and astronomy. His parents hoped he would grow up to be his own person, not defined by his resemblance to anyone else. However, Michael was naturally drawn to music, particularly to Elvis's songs. When Elvis's music played on the radio, Michael would stop whatever he was doing and listen intently. He seemed to understand the rhythm and melody in a way that surprised his parents, and he could sing along with perfect pitch and timing. Linda Thompson later said that watching Michael listen to Elvis was like watching someone recognize a long-lost friend. By 1975, when Michael was 9 years old, the resemblance to young Elvis was so striking that it was impossible to ignore. Photographs of Elvis as a child, when placed next to current photos of Michael, looked like they could be the same person taken years apart. The similarity extended beyond just facial features. Michael had the same body type, the same way of moving, and even some of the same mannerisms that Elvis had displayed as a young performer. When Robert and Linda Thompson heard that Elvis would be performing in Memphis on September 27, 1975, they made a decision that would change their family's life forever. They decided to take Michael to see Elvis perform, thinking it would be a special experience for their son to see the famous entertainer he resembled so closely. They had no idea that the evening would become one of the most talked about events in Elvis's career. Getting tickets to an Elvis concert was never easy, especially for a family with limited financial resources. Robert Thompson worked extra hours at the grocery store for months, and Linda took on additional bookkeeping work for other local businesses to save enough money for the tickets and the trip to Memphis. They wanted good seats so that Michael could have a clear view of Elvis, not knowing that Elvis would soon have an equally clear view of Michael. Michael was excited about the prospect of seeing Elvis perform, but his excitement was different from what his parents expected. While most 9-year-olds would be thrilled about seeing a famous entertainer, Michael seemed more curious than starstruck. He asked thoughtful questions about what Elvis would be like in person, whether he would look the same as he did on television, and whether he would be able to tell that Michael looked like him. In the weeks leading up to the concert, Michael's resemblance to Elvis seemed to become even more pronounced, as if he was unconsciously preparing for the meeting. His hair naturally formed the same curls that Elvis had worn as a young man, and his mannerisms became more reminiscent of Elvis's early performances. Linda Thompson noticed that Michael had begun moving differently, with a confidence and rhythm that seemed too mature for a 9-year-old. The Thompson family arrived in Memphis the day of the concert, staying in a modest motel near the venue. They spent the afternoon exploring the city, visiting some of the places associated with Elvis's early career, including Sun Records and Beale Street. Michael was fascinated by these locations, asking detailed questions about Elvis's life and career that surprised his parents with their sophistication. That evening, as they prepared for the concert, Linda Thompson carefully styled Michael's hair and dressed him in his best clothes, a white shirt and dark pants that, coincidentally, resembled the type of outfit Elvis had worn during his early performances. She had no idea that this choice of clothing would make Michael's resemblance to Elvis even more striking under the concert venue's lights. The Mid-South Coliseum was packed with 15,000 Elvis fans, and the energy was electric as everyone waited for the king to take the stage. The Thompson family had seats in the third row, close enough to see Elvis clearly, but far enough back that they didn't expect to be noticed by the performer. Robert and Linda were excited to share this experience with their son, but they had no idea that Michael was about to become part of the show. When Elvis walked onto the stage in his iconic white jumpsuit, the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Michael stood on his seat to get a better view, and for a moment, he and Elvis were looking directly at each other across the distance between the stage and the third row of seats. In that moment, something extraordinary happened. Elvis stopped his opening number mid-verse and just stared at Michael with an expression of complete shock. At first, the audience didn't understand what was happening. Elvis was known for his spontaneous interactions with fans, but this was different. He wasn't smiling or acknowledging applause. He was standing completely still, looking at one specific spot in the audience, with an expression that suggested he had seen something impossible. Elvis slowly walked to the edge of the stage, shielding his eyes from the bright lights to get a better look at Michael. The Coliseum began to quiet down as people realized that something unusual was happening. Elvis picked up his microphone and said, "Hold on a minute, folks. I need to see something." The crowd fell silent, and all eyes turned toward the area where Elvis was looking. "Young man in the white shirt, third row," Elvis said, his voice carrying clearly through the arena. "Can you stand up for me?" Michael, realizing that Elvis was talking to him, stood up on his seat again. The spotlight operator, following Elvis's gaze, illuminated Michael, and suddenly 15,000 people could see what had stopped Elvis in his tracks. The resemblance was so striking that a collective gasp went through the arena. Even from a distance, it was clear that Michael looked exactly like Elvis had looked as a child. The same hair, the same face, the same smile. It was as if a young Elvis Presley had somehow appeared in the audience to watch his older self perform. Elvis stood at the edge of the stage for a long moment, just looking at Michael. When he finally spoke, his voice was filled with emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I think I'm looking at the future Elvis right there. Son, what's your name?" Michael, overwhelmed by the attention but trying to be brave, called back, "Michael Thompson, sir." Elvis nodded and smiled that famous crooked grin. Michael Thompson. Well, Michael, you sure do look familiar. The crowd was buzzing with excitement and amazement. People were pointing and talking, trying to get a better look at the boy who looked so much like their hero. Elvis continued to stare at Michael, clearly affected by the resemblance in a way that went beyond simple surprise. It was as if he was looking at a ghost from his own past, a reminder of who he had been before fame had changed everything. Michael, Elvis said, I think you and I need to have a conversation. Would you like to come up here and meet me properly? The invitation sent the crowd into a frenzy. Security guards immediately began moving toward Michael's location to escort him safely to the stage, while his parents looked on in amazement at what was happening to their son. When Michael reached the stage, helped up by security guards, the full extent of his resemblance to Elvis became even more apparent. Standing next to each other under the bright stage lights, the similarity was almost supernatural. Elvis crouched down so he could be at Michael's eye level, and the two of them looked like they could be the same person separated by time. Michael, Elvis said quietly, speaking into his microphone so the audience could hear. How old are you, son? I'm 9, Mr. Presley, Michael replied, his voice clear and confident despite the overwhelming situation. 9 years old, Elvis repeated, shaking his head in amazement. Do you know you look exactly like I did when I was your age? Michael nodded. Yes, sir. People tell me that all the time. Elvis stood up and addressed the audience. Folks, I have to tell you, this is the most incredible thing I've ever experienced. This young man doesn't just look like me. He looks exactly like me. It's like looking at a photograph of myself from 1954. He looked back down at Michael. Where are you from, Michael? Tupelo, Mississippi, sir, Michael answered. Same as you. The crowd erupted in amazement. Not only did Michael look like Elvis, but he was from the same hometown. Elvis's eyes widened. Tupelo? Really? When were you born, son? January 8th, 1966, Michael replied. Elvis nearly dropped his microphone. January 8th, that's my birthday too. Ladies and gentlemen, this young man was born in the same town, on the same day, and he looks exactly like me. If I didn't know better, I'd think I was looking at myself. Elvis was clearly moved by the encounter, and the audience could sense that this was more than just an interesting coincidence for him. It was a profound moment that seemed to be affecting him on a deep emotional level. Michael, Elvis said, do you like music? Yes, sir, Michael replied. I love your music especially, Elvis smiled. Well, since you're up here, would you like to help me with a song? What happened next became one of the most spontaneous and memorable moments in concert history. Elvis sat down at his piano and gestured for Michael to stand beside him. Do you know Love Me Tender? Elvis asked. Michael nodded enthusiastically. Good, because that was one of my first big hits, back when I looked just like you do now. Elvis began playing the gentle opening chords of Love Me Tender, and after a moment's hesitation, Michael began singing along. His voice was clear and sweet, with a natural rhythm and timing that amazed everyone in the arena. But what was most remarkable was that Michael seemed to instinctively understand how to harmonize with Elvis, as if they had been performing together for years. The duet between Elvis and his 9-year-old doppelganger was magical. Their voices blended perfectly, and Michael seemed completely comfortable on stage, moving naturally and confidently as if he belonged there. The audience was mesmerized, watching what felt like a conversation between Elvis's past and present selves. As the song ended, Elvis put his arm around Michael's shoulders and looked out at the audience. You know, folks, he said, meeting Michael here tonight has reminded me of something important. It's reminded me of who I was before all this started, before the fame and the success and everything that came with it. Looking at Michael is like looking back at my own childhood, at the boy who just loved music and dreamed of maybe someday getting to share it with people. Elvis turned back to Michael. Can I ask you something, son? What do you want to be when you grow up? Michael thought for a moment before answering. I want to be a singer like you, Mr. Presley, but I also want to be a scientist and maybe help sick people. The honesty and ambition in Michael's answer clearly touched Elvis. That's wonderful, Michael. You know what? You can be anything you want to be. Don't let anyone tell you different. Elvis then did something that surprised everyone, including his own band and management. He announced that he was going to take a short break from the planned show to spend more time talking with Michael. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you don't mind, but this is too special an opportunity to rush through. Michael and I have some things to discuss. For the next 20 minutes, Elvis and Michael sat on the edge of the stage, just talking. Elvis asked Michael about his life in Tupelo, his family, his interests, and his dreams. Michael, despite being only 9 years old, answered thoughtfully and asked Elvis intelligent questions about his career, his music, and what it was like to be famous. The conversation revealed that the similarities between Elvis and Michael went far beyond physical appearance. Michael had the same curiosity about music, the same natural charisma, and the same ability to connect with people that had made Elvis special from a young age. But Michael also had something that Elvis felt he had lost over the years: innocence, optimism, and a sense of wonder about the world. Michael, Elvis said at one point during their conversation, you remind me of why I started singing in the first place. When I was your age, I just wanted to make people happy with music. Somewhere along the way, I think I forgot that simple goal and started worrying about all the other stuff that comes with success. Meeting you tonight has reminded me what's really important. Elvis also talked to Michael about the responsibilities that come with talent and success. If you do become a singer, Michael, always remember that your job is to lift people up, to make them feel better about themselves and their lives. Music has power, and with power comes responsibility. Use your gifts to help others, and never forget where you came from. As their conversation continued, Elvis made a decision that would change Michael's life forever. Michael, he said, I want to make you an offer. How would you like to come visit me at Graceland sometime? I'd like to show you my home, maybe teach you a few things about music, and introduce you to some people who might be able to help you pursue your dreams. The invitation to Graceland was unprecedented. Elvis rarely invited strangers to his home, especially children he had just met. But there was something about Michael that had touched Elvis deeply, and he felt a genuine desire to mentor this boy who reminded him so much of his younger self. Michael's parents, who had been watching from the audience in amazement, were overwhelmed by Elvis's generosity. Robert Thompson later said that he had never imagined that taking his son to see Elvis perform would result in such an incredible opportunity. Linda Thompson was crying with joy and gratitude, knowing that this experience would be something Michael would treasure for the rest of his life. Elvis then made another announcement that surprised everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to do something special tonight. Michael here has reminded me of something very important, and I want to share that with all of you. This young man represents the future of music, the next generation of entertainers who will carry on the tradition of bringing joy to people through song. Elvis stood up and walked to center stage, bringing Michael with him. I want everyone here tonight to remember Michael Thompson from Tupelo, Mississippi. I have a feeling we're going to be hearing a lot more from him in the years to come. And Michael, I want you to remember this night, not because you met a famous person, but because you discovered that dreams can come true if you're willing to work for them. Elvis then did something completely unexpected. He took off one of his signature scarves and tied it around Michael's neck. This is for you, Michael, he said, a reminder that you should never stop believing in yourself and your dreams. And whenever you wear it, remember that you have a friend who believes in you and wants to see you succeed. The gesture brought tears to the eyes of many people in the audience. Elvis. Elvis's scarves were treasured by his fans, and the fact that he was giving one to a 9-year-old boy he had just met showed how deeply the encounter had affected him. The rest of Elvis's concert that night was charged with a special energy. The encounter with Michael had clearly rejuvenated Elvis and reminded him of his love for performing and connecting with people. He sang with more passion and joy than he had shown in years, frequently mentioning Michael and the lesson he had learned about staying true to your roots and remembering why you started your journey. After the concert, Elvis spent another hour with Michael and his family backstage. He gave Michael signed photographs, shared stories about his own childhood in Tupelo, and promised to stay in touch. True to his word, Elvis did maintain contact with the Thompson family over the following months, calling occasionally to check on Michael's progress and offering encouragement and advice. Michael did visit Graceland several times over the next year, and Elvis became a genuine mentor to him. Elvis introduced Michael to music industry professionals, arranged for him to receive vocal coaching, and helped him understand the business side of entertainment. But more importantly, Elvis taught Michael about character, integrity, and the importance of using talent to help others. The story of Elvis meeting his doppelganger spread quickly through the media, and Michael became something of a celebrity himself. He appeared on several television shows, always wearing the scarf Elvis had given him, and telling the story of his incredible encounter with the king. But Michael's parents were careful to keep him grounded and focused on his education and normal childhood activities. When Elvis passed away in August 1977, Michael was devastated. He had lost not just a mentor, but a friend who had believed in him and encouraged his dreams. At Elvis's funeral, Michael sang "Love Me Tender" as a tribute to the man who had changed his life. His performance was so moving that it was covered by news outlets around the world.
Michael Thompson grew up to become a successful singer and songwriter, but he never forgot the lessons Elvis had taught him about humility, generosity, and using talent to serve others. He established a foundation that provides music education to underprivileged children, and he frequently speaks about the importance of mentorship and believing in young people's potential.
Today, Michael Thompson is in his 50s and still bears a remarkable resemblance to Elvis, though now he looks more like Elvis did in his later years. He continues to perform and write music, always dedicating his concerts to the memory of the man who saw potential in a 9-year-old boy and took the time to nurture it. The story of Elvis meeting his doppelganger reminds us that sometimes the most important encounters in our lives come completely by chance. Elvis could have simply acknowledged Michael's resemblance and moved on with his show. Instead, he chose to see the meeting as an opportunity to connect with a young person, to share his wisdom and experience, and to help someone else pursue their dreams. For Michael, meeting Elvis was obviously life-changing, but the encounter also had a profound impact on Elvis himself. It reminded him of his own beginnings, his original motivations for pursuing music, and the importance of staying connected to his roots and his community. In helping Michael, Elvis rediscovered some of his own passion and purpose. The resemblance between Elvis and Michael was extraordinary, but what made their encounter truly special was the human connection they formed. It wasn't just about physical similarity, it was about recognizing potential, offering encouragement, and understanding that we all have the power to positively impact someone else's life. If this incredible story of mentorship and dreams coming true moved you, subscribe and hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear about the importance of believing in young people and taking time to encourage their dreams. Have you ever met someone who reminded you of yourself? Share your story in the comments. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more amazing stories about the moments that connect us all.